The amber liquid in Wesley Raymond's crystal tumbler caught the city lights like liquid gold, but his hand trembled as he raised it to his lips. 42 floors above Manhattan, surrounded by the gleaming trophies of his success, he should have felt invincible. Instead, the silence of his penthouse felt suffocating, broken only by the distant hum of traffic far below and the relentless tick of a Swiss watch that had cost more than most people's cars. At 34, Wesley had everything the world said mattered. The medical technology empire he'd built from scratch had revolutionized cardiac surgery. His name graced the covers of Fortune and Forbes. 3 separate pharmaceutical giants had made billion-dollar offers for his company in the past year alone. Yet tonight, like so many nights before, he sat alone in his glass tower, wondering why success felt so much like an elegant prison. The phone's shrill ring at 2:47 a.m. shattered the silence like a gunshot. Wesley glanced at the unknown number, his first instinct to let it go to voicemail. Nobody called with good news at this hour. But something, maybe the loneliness that had been eating at him lately, maybe simple curiosity, made him answer. Wesley Raymond. Wesley, it's me. The voice hit him like a physical blow, stealing the breath from his lungs and sending the crystal tumbler crashing to the marble floor in an explosion of glass and aged whiskey. 10 years collapsed into nothing. 10 years of carefully constructed walls, of forcing himself to forget, of building an empire to fill the void where his heart used to be, all of it crumbled at the sound of 3 simple words. Rosemary West. Rosemary? Her name escaped as a whisper, a prayer he'd stopped believing would ever be answered. His legs gave way, sending him stumbling toward his leather chair, the same chair where he'd made decisions affecting thousands of lives, where he'd built his fortune, where he'd convinced himself he was happy. I know I have no right to call. Her voice was older now, weathered by whatever storms had shaped the past decade, but it still sent electricity through his veins. I know it's been 10 years, and I know you probably hate me, but Wesley. I need you. Need. The word hung between them like a bridge across an impossible chasm. Wesley gripped the phone with white knuckles, his mind racing through 1,000 questions, 1,000 accusations, 1,000 apologies he'd rehearsed in the mirror during those first brutal months after she'd vanished from his life. Where are you? Are you okay? God, Rosemary, I looked for you everywhere. My son needs your kidney. The words came out in a rush, desperate and broken. Eli needs your kidney, and he has hours to live. The world tilted sideways. Wesley felt as if he was falling through space, watching his carefully ordered existence shatter like the crystal at his feet. Your son. Our son. The correction was barely a whisper, but it hit him with the force of an avalanche. Wesley, I know this is impossible to hear over the phone, I know it sounds insane, but he's 9 years old and he's dying and you're the only one who can save him. Sometimes the most important calls of our lives come when we least expect them, but what happens when the voice on the other end belongs to the woman you never stopped loving, telling you about a child you never knew existed? Wesley's mind reeled, trying to process the impossible. A son. Their son. 9 years old. The math was simple, devastating, perfect. The last night they'd spent together, when everything had fallen apart, when pride and fear and his mother's disapproval had driven them to say things they could never take back. 9 years, he whispered, the number echoing in his chest like a death knell. Rosemary, how could you not tell me? How could you? Because I was 21 and terrified and you made it very clear that your world had no place for someone like me. Her voice cracked, and Wesley could hear her fighting tears. Because your mother told me exactly what you really thought of our relationship, and I believed her. His mother. Wesley closed his eyes, remembering Ruth Raymond's satisfaction when Rosemary had simply vanished, her relief that her son's unfortunate infatuation had resolved itself. Had she known? Had she driven Rosemary away deliberately? Where is he? Wesley was already moving, adrenaline overriding the shock. Where are you? Presbyterian Hospital, room 314. Wesley, please hurry. The doctors say. Her voice broke completely. They say if we can't find a compatible donor tonight, we're going to lose him. I'm coming. The words left his mouth before his brain could process them, pure instinct overriding a decade of careful control. I'm coming right now. If you haven't already, hit that subscribe button and join our Dear Love Diaries family. Your special place in this community of heartfelt stories is waiting for you. These passionate journeys of souls connecting against all odds have brought together thousands of beautiful hearts just like yours. Make sure you hit the bell too, so you'll know immediately when a new story unfolds in our diary of love. The line went dead, leaving Wesley alone with the wreckage of his whiskey glass and the earth-shattering knowledge that everything he thought he knew about his life had been built on a foundation of lies. 35 minutes later, Wesley's Bentley cut through the empty Manhattan streets like a blade, every red light an agony of lost time. He'd thrown on the first clothes his shaking hands could find. Dark jeans and a black cashmere sweater that did nothing to warm the ice that had settled in his veins. His usual armor of bespoke suits and Italian leather lay forgotten, as irrelevant to this crisis as everything else he'd thought mattered. The city blurred past his windows, the same city where he'd built his empire, where he'd convinced himself that success could fill the hole Rosemary had left in his soul. Tonight, those gleaming towers felt like monuments to his own foolishness. Presbyterian Hospital rose before him like a fortress of fluorescent hope and antiseptic desperation. Wesley abandoned his car to the night valet, not caring that his $300,000 vehicle was being handled by a stranger. Money, status, possessions, none of it mattered when your son was dying and you'd never even known he existed. The emergency entrance doors whispered open with an electronic sigh, and Wesley stepped into a world that smelled of industrial disinfectant and human fear. The harsh lighting bleached everything the color of anxiety, and the polished floors reflected the fluorescent tubes above like a funhouse mirror of medical urgency. At the information desk, a tired-looking nurse with kind eyes and gray hair pulled back in a practical bun looked up from her computer. She had the weathered expression of someone who'd spent decades delivering news both miraculous and devastating, who'd learned to read hope and despair in the set of shoulders and the tremor of hands. "I need to get to room 314, Wesley said, his voice steadier than his hands. "Eli West." The nurse studied his face with practiced assessment, taking in his expensive clothes, his obvious distress, the way he held himself like a man whose world had just been turned upside down. "Are you family?" Family. The question hit him like a physical blow. Was he family? Could you claim a child you'd never known existed? Could you call yourself a father when you'd missed 9 years of birthdays and bedtime stories and scraped knees and all the tiny moments that built the architecture of love? "I'm Wesley Raymond," he said, the name carrying its usual weight even in his uncertainty. "I think I'm his father." Something shifted in the nurse's expression. Surprise, perhaps, or recognition of the Raymond name that graced medical wings and research foundations across the city. But underneath the professional composure, Wesley saw something else, compassion for a man who'd just discovered he was a father in the worst possible way. "Third floor, pediatric ICU," she said gently. "Elevators are down the hall to your right." The elevator ride stretched like a journey to another planet. Wesley watched the floor numbers climb, each one bringing him closer to a meeting that would either destroy him or remake him entirely. His reflection in the polished steel doors showed a stranger, a man who'd spent 10 years building walls so high he'd forgotten what lay beyond them, now facing the possibility that everything he'd constructed had been built on the wrong foundation. The doors opened with a soft chime onto a world designed for the smallest and bravest patients. Here, the harsh hospital efficiency was softened by gentle touches, murals of soaring butterflies and rocket ships reaching for cartoon stars, lighting that was warmer and more forgiving. Even the air itself seemed lighter, as if hope lived more easily in spaces designed for children who still believed in miracles. Wesley's Italian leather shoes whispered against linoleum as he made his way down the corridor, past rooms where other families faced their own nightmares, other parents kept vigil over children who'd been struck down by the random cruelty of illness and accident. Room 314 beckoned from halfway down the hall, and Wesley could see her before she noticed him. Rosemary. She sat beside a small bed like a guardian angel carved from exhaustion and love, her body curved protectively toward the sleeping form of their son. 10 years had changed her, adding depth to features that had once been merely beautiful and transforming them into something that spoke of strength earned through trial, wisdom purchased with pain, grace learned through carrying burdens alone. She wore scrubs the color of faded denim that somehow made her dark skin glow even under the unforgiving hospital lights. Her hair was longer now, black curls escaping from what had probably been a neat ponytail hours ago, and though her face showed the lines that came from years of worry and responsibility, she was still the most breathtaking woman Wesley had ever seen. 10 years of telling himself he'd moved on, 10 years of building an empire to fill the void she'd left, 10 years of convincing himself that what they'd shared had been nothing more than youthful infatuation, all of it crumbled in the space of a heartbeat. And in the bed. Wesley's breath caught as if someone had reached into his chest and squeezed his heart with an iron fist. The boy, Eli, his son, was small and pale against the white hospital sheets, but even diminished by illness and surrounded by machines that beeped and hummed their electronic lullabies, he was unmistakably, undeniably Wesley's child. The resemblance was almost supernatural in its precision. The same dark hair that refused to lie flat despite sleep and sickness, the same fine bone structure that would be aristocratic and strong when he reached manhood, the same stubborn cowlick that had frustrated Wesley's own stylists for 34 years. Even in sleep, even pale with illness, there was something in the set of his jaw, the shape of his mouth, that was purely, perfectly familiar. This was his child. His son. The family he'd never dared to dream about because he'd been too afraid of the vulnerability it would require. Rosemary must have sensed his presence through that mysterious awareness that had always existed between them, because she looked up suddenly, and their eyes met across the small room with an impact that was like lightning striking twice in the same impossible place. Have you ever had someone from your past reappear at your most vulnerable moment? Share your story in the comments. Your experience might help someone else feel less alone. The years collapsed between them like a house of cards. For a moment, they were 21 and 24 again, when love had felt like the only truth that mattered and the future had stretched ahead infinite with possibility. But now there was so much more in her eyes. Wariness earned through hard experience, strength forged in fires he'd never witnessed, and underneath it all, a fierce protective love that made the air shimmer with intensity. Wesley. His name fell from her lips like a prayer and an accusation wrapped in silk, carrying 10 years of hurt and hope and carefully buried longing. She rose slowly from her chair, movements careful as if her body ached from too many hours maintaining vigil, and Wesley noticed how the scrubs hung loose on a frame that had grown too thin, probably from weeks of forgetting to eat while her child fought for his life. Rosemary. Her name tasted like coming home and starting over simultaneously, familiar and strange and absolutely right. There were 1,000 questions burning in his throat, apologies and accusations tangled together in knots too complex to unravel when time was measured in heartbeats and their son lay sleeping between them like a bridge across a decade of separation. Instead of words, Wesley found himself moving toward the bed, drawn by an instinct deeper than thought or reason. Eli looked even smaller up close, but there was something in his sleeping face. A determination even in unconsciousness, a stubborn set to his mouth that Wesley recognized from his own childhood photographs. "He loves Batman," Rosemary said softly, her voice barely above a whisper as she gestured to the superhero symbols decorating Eli's hospital gown. "Says he's going to be one when he grows up, save people who are in trouble." Her voice caught, and Wesley heard the terrible irony: their son wanted to save others while he was the one who desperately needed saving. Wesley reached out instinctively, then hesitated, his hand hovering inches above Eli's forehead. Did he have the right? Could he claim even this small connection to a son who had lived 9 years without knowing his father existed? He's yours, Rosemary whispered, reading his hesitation with the intuition that had always existed between them. You can touch him. Wesley's hand trembled as his fingers made contact with hair that was silk-soft and exactly the same texture as his own had been at that age. The simple touch sent electricity through his nervous system, recognition deeper than DNA, a cellular acknowledgement that this small person was part of him, had been created from his love for the woman standing beside him. He's beautiful, Wesley managed, his voice thick with emotions he couldn't begin to name. He looks like you, Rosemary finished, her own voice breaking with the weight of 9 years of seeing her son's father in every expression, every gesture, every stubborn moment. Everyone says so. He has your impossible cowlick that won't behave no matter what I do to it. Your way of tilting his head when he's concentrating on something complicated. And your eyes, God, Wesley, when he looks at me with that serious expression, it's like seeing you at 9 years old. Each word hit Wesley like a physical blow, a reminder of everything he'd missed. 9 years of watching this child grow, of being the person he ran to when storms scared him, of teaching him to ride a bike and throw a baseball and navigate the complicated world of childhood friendships. 9 years of bedtime stories and scraped knees and proud moments at school plays and science fairs. Why? The question tore from his throat, raw and broken and carrying a decade of bewildered pain. Why didn't you tell me? Rosemary's eyes filled with tears, but her chin lifted with that familiar stubborn pride that had both frustrated and fascinated him all those years ago. Because you made it crystal clear that your world and mine were never going to intersect in any meaningful way. Because I was 21 and pregnant and terrified, and your mother made absolutely certain I understood that Wesley Raymond's unplanned baby would never be welcome in your perfect future. The words stung because they carried echoes of truth Wesley couldn't entirely deny. At 24, hadn't he been exactly that focused on building his empire? That convinced that love, no matter how powerful, couldn't bridge the gap between their different worlds? And his mother. God, what had Ruth Raymond said to drive Rosemary away so completely? Before Wesley could find words that might begin to bridge 10 years of misunderstanding, footsteps echoed in the hallway, approaching with the measured pace of medical authority. A woman in a white coat appeared in the doorway, Latina, mid-40s, with intelligent dark eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses and the kind of steady presence that probably brought comfort to hundreds of worried families. Ms. West? She looked between Wesley and Rosemary with professional curiosity, clearly trying to place Wesley in the family dynamic. I'm Dr. Elena, the transplant coordinator. The night nurse mentioned we might have a potential donor? Wesley straightened automatically, muscle memory from countless boardroom negotiations kicking in even as his heart hammered against his ribs. But this wasn't a business deal. This was his son's life hanging in the balance, and all his corporate training felt useless in the face of such primal stakes. Wesley Raymond, he said, extending his hand with practiced confidence that masked the terror churning in his stomach. I'm Eli's father. Dr. Elena's eyebrows rose slightly, whether in surprise at his sudden appearance or recognition of the Raymond name that graced medical facilities across the city, Wesley couldn't tell. But she maintained her professional composure with the ease of someone who'd learned not to show reaction to complex family situations. I see. Well, Mr. Raymond, we'll need to run extensive compatibility tests immediately. Eli's condition has deteriorated significantly over the past 12 hours. His kidney function has dropped to less than 12%, and his body is beginning to show signs of systemic failure. The clinical words hit Wesley like ice water, cutting through the emotional reunion and forcing him to confront the medical reality that had brought them together. His son, was dying, and they were discussing percentages and compatibility as if Eli were a problem to be solved rather than a child whose life hung by increasingly fragile threads. What do you need from me? Wesley asked, his voice carrying the same authority he brought to corporate crises, though his hands betrayed him with their trembling. Blood work first, then tissue typing, cross-matching, psychological evaluation to ensure you understand the risks. Dr. Elena's voice became a steady stream of medical terminology that Wesley absorbed despite his emotional chaos. Years of running a medical technology company had given him enough knowledge to understand that what she was describing was complex, time-sensitive, and far from guaranteed to succeed. "How long?" Rosemary asked, her voice barely above a whisper but carrying the weight of a mother's desperation. "How long does he have if we can't find a match?" Dr. Elena's expression grew more grave. "If we can identify a compatible donor and move to surgery within the next 18 hours, his prognosis is very good. But every hour of delay exponentially increases the risks. At his current rate of decline." She paused, choosing her words carefully. "We're working against time in the most literal sense." Wesley felt something cold and absolutely determined settle in his chest, the same focused calm that had helped him navigate impossible business deals and corporate crises. But this was no negotiation, this was his son's life, and failure simply wasn't an option that existed in his universe. "Then we don't waste another second," he said firmly, his voice carrying the authority that had built an empire. "Whatever tests you need, whatever procedures, whatever it takes, I'm ready now." As Dr. Elena explained the testing process with clinical precision, Wesley found himself stealing glances at Rosemary. She stood with her arms wrapped around herself as if trying to hold her world together through sheer willpower, and Wesley could see the hairline cracks where her incredible strength was beginning to fracture under the weight of carrying this burden alone for so long. There were new lines around her eyes, worry lines that spoke of countless sleepless nights and the constant low-grade terror that came with watching your child fight a battle he was slowly losing. She was thinner than he remembered, and Wesley wondered how many meals she'd skipped while sitting vigil, how many times she'd chosen to stay by Eli's bedside instead of taking care of herself. When Dr. Elena finished her explanation and left to coordinate the testing, an uncomfortable silence settled over the room like dust. The only sounds were the soft mechanical symphony of Eli's monitors and the distant hum of a hospital that never truly slept, where other families faced their own impossible moments in rooms just like this one. "I should have found you," Wesley said finally, his voice rough with regret that felt like broken glass in his throat. "After that night, after everything fell apart between us, I should have tried harder to find you." Rosemary's laugh was bitter as winter wind, sharp with old pain. "You did try to find me, Wesley. I made sure you couldn't. I changed my number 3 times, moved to Philadelphia, made myself disappear so completely that even I almost forgot who I used to be. But why? If you knew about..." Wesley gestured helplessly toward their sleeping son. "If you knew you were pregnant, why disappear completely? Why not at least tell me?" She turned to look at him fully for the first time since he'd arrived, and Wesley saw the girl he'd fallen in love with flickering behind the exhausted woman she'd become, still there, still beautiful, but tempered by experience and hardened by the necessity of surviving as a single mother. "Because I loved you too much to trap you," she said simply, the words carrying a quiet dignity that made Wesley's chest ache. "Because I knew that if I told you about the baby, you'd do the honorable thing. You'd marry me out of duty, support us out of obligation, give us everything money could buy. And you'd resent us for it every single day of your life." The accusation hung between them like a sword, and Wesley wanted to deny it immediately, to tell her she was wrong, that he would have chosen love over duty. But wasn't there some uncomfortable truth in what she said? At 24, hadn't he been exactly that concerned with his image, his future, his family's stringent expectations? "I was young," he admitted finally, the words tasting like ash. "And scared. And probably exactly as selfish and self-absorbed as you thought I was." "We both were," Rosemary said, her voice softening with something that might have been forgiveness. "Young and scared and trying to do what we thought was right with information we didn't really have. But it doesn't matter now, Wesley. None of it matters except Eli." As if summoned by the sound of his name, the boy stirred in his bed. His eyelids fluttered like butterfly wings preparing for flight, and Wesley held his breath as Eli slowly opened eyes that were indeed going to be storm gray like his father's, though right now they held the soft blue-gray of childhood, clouds gathering before the tempest of adolescence. "Mama?" Eli's voice was small and scratchy, probably from the breathing treatments Wesley could see evidence of on the bedside table. "I'm right here, sweetheart." Rosemary was at his side instantly, her transformation from exhausted woman to protective mother so complete and immediate it took Wesley's breath away. "How are you feeling?" "Tired," Eli admitted with the brutal honesty that children brought to describing the indescribable. "And a little scared." "Who's that man?" Wesley's heart stopped entirely as Eli's gaze found him. "How do you introduce yourself to your own child? How do you explain a relationship that didn't exist 6 hours ago but now felt like the most important thing in your universe?" Rosemary's eyes met Wesley's over Eli's head, and for a moment the decade of separation dissolved completely. They were just two people who had once loved each other with the desperate intensity of youth, now connected by something infinitely more precious and terrifying, this small, brave boy who carried pieces of both their souls. "This is Wesley," Rosemary said carefully, her voice steady despite the emotional earthquake happening around them. He's a very special friend of mine. He came to help make sure you get better." Wesley stepped closer to the bed, his throat tight with emotions he couldn't begin to categorize. "Hello, Eli. I've been looking forward to meeting you." Eli studied Wesley with the serious intensity that children brought to important moments, taking in details with the sharp observational skills that had probably served him well in navigating the world as a only child with a single mother. "Are you a doctor?" Eli asked, his voice growing stronger with curiosity despite his obvious exhaustion. "No," Wesley said, finding his voice despite the storm of feelings threatening to overwhelm him. "But I know some excellent doctors, and I'm here to make absolutely sure they take the very best care of you." "That's good," Eli said with the matter-of-fact acceptance of childhood, though Wesley could see intelligence working behind those gray-blue eyes that were so eerily familiar. "Mama says the doctors are going to help me get all better, but it's still pretty scary sometimes." The simple honesty of the statement hit Wesley like a physical blow. Here was his son. Facing a life-threatening illness with more courage than most adults could muster, worried about being scared rather than being angry at the unfairness of it all. "Being scared is okay," Wesley said gently, moving closer to the bed. "Even grown-ups get scared when things are uncertain. But you know what? You're not alone in this. You have your mom, and now you have me, and we're going to make sure you have everything you need to get through this. Are you going to stay?" Eli asked, and the hope in his voice nearly destroyed Wesley completely. "Yes," Wesley said without hesitation, his voice stronger than he felt. "I'm going to stay as long as you need me to stay." "Good," Eli said, settling back into his pillows with visible relief. "I like it better when there are more people around. It makes everything feel less scary." As Eli drifted back toward sleep, Wesley felt something fundamental and irreversible shift inside his chest. This wasn't just about medical compatibility or crisis management. This was about a little boy who was brave enough to face the unknown as long as he didn't have to face it alone. And for the first time in his adult life, Wesley Raymond understood what it meant to be truly, completely, desperately needed, not for his money or his business acumen or his family name, but simply for his presence, his strength, his willingness to stand guard against whatever darkness threatened the people he loved. The phone call that had shattered his carefully constructed world at 2:47 in the morning was already transforming into something else entirely, not an ending, but a beginning. A summons to become the man he'd never known he was capable of being. The man his son needed him to be. The man Rosemary had always seen hidden beneath the armor of success and ambition. The man he'd been afraid to become until someone small and brave and dying called him to something greater than himself. Chapter 2. The next 6 hours passed in a blur of sterile examination rooms and medical procedures that felt both routine and life-altering. Wesley found himself in spaces that smelled of antiseptic and anxiety, giving blood samples to technicians who handled the vials like they contained liquid hope, answering questions from doctors who spoke in careful, measured tones about compatibility and risk factors and the complex mathematics of organ transplantation. Each test brought them closer to an answer, and closer to the possibility that Wesley might not be the miracle they desperately needed. Dr. Elena had been thorough in her explanations, walking Wesley through every step of the process with the kind of professional compassion that probably helped families navigate the most terrifying moments of their lives. Blood typing, tissue matching, cross-reactivity panels. A symphony of medical terminology that would determine whether Wesley could save his son or watch helplessly as Eli slipped away. The preliminary results looked promising, Dr. Elena had said during their last consultation, but her careful optimism carried undertones that made Wesley's stomach clench. Your blood types are compatible, and the initial tissue markers are encouraging. But we need the complete panel before we can move forward. Now, at 8:30 in the morning, Wesley sat in the family waiting area nursing his fourth cup of hospital coffee and watching the sun climb over Manhattan's skyline through windows that needed cleaning. The caffeine did nothing to calm his nerves, but holding the warm cup gave his hands something to do besides shake. His phone had been buzzing relentlessly. Jimmy calling from the office, board members wanting explanations for his sudden disappearance, reporters who'd somehow gotten wind that Wesley Raymond was at Presbyterian Hospital. Wesley had sent a single text to Jimmy, family emergency. Cancel everything indefinitely. Handle the Morrison meeting however you see fit. The response had been immediate, boss, what family emergency? You don't have any family except your mother. The words had hit Wesley like a physical blow. You don't have any family. How profoundly wrong Jimmy was, and how sad that everyone, including Wesley himself until 6 hours ago, had believed it was true. Mr. Raymond? Wesley looked up to find a woman in scrubs approaching with a gentle smile. She was older than most of the nurses he'd encountered, maybe 60, with silver-streaked hair and the kind of calm presence that spoke of decades spent comforting worried families. I'm Nurse Ann, she said, settling into the uncomfortable plastic chair beside him. I've been taking care of Eli during the night shift. He's been asking for you. Wesley's heart leaped. Is he okay? Has his condition changed? He's stable, Nurse Ann assured him quickly. But he's awake and alert, and he keeps asking about the nice man who said he'd stay. He wants to know if you're really going to keep your promise. The simple faith in that question nearly undid Wesley completely. Here was a 9-year-old boy facing the fight of his life, and his biggest concern was whether the stranger who'd promised to stay would actually keep his word. Of course I'm going to keep my promise, Wesley said, already standing. Can I see him? That's why I'm here. Ms. West stepped out to get some breakfast, first time she's left his side in 48 hours, and Eli specifically asked if you could sit with him while she's gone. Wesley followed Nurse Ann through corridors that were becoming familiar, past rooms where other families faced their own crises. The pediatric ICU felt different in the morning light, less desperate, more hopeful, though the underlying tension of children fighting for their lives still hummed in the air like electricity. Room 314 looked smaller with daylight streaming through the windows, but Eli looked better, more color in his cheeks, more alertness in his eyes. He was sitting up slightly in bed, working on what appeared to be a coloring book, his tongue poking out in concentration in a gesture that was so purely Wesley's own childhood habit that it took his breath away. Wesley. Eli's face lit up with genuine happiness, and Wesley felt something warm and unfamiliar bloom in his chest. When was the last time someone had been genuinely happy to see him? Not Wesley Raymond the CEO or Wesley Raymond the eligible bachelor, but just Wesley. Hey there, kiddo, Wesley said, settling into the chair Rosemary had occupied for so many hours. What are you working on? It's a picture of superheroes, Eli said, holding up his coloring book with pride. This is Batman, and this is Superman, and this is Wonder Woman. I'm making them all different colors because I think regular colors are boring. Wesley studied the page, where Batman's cape was bright purple and Superman's costume was emerald green. I like your artistic choices. Very creative. Mama says creativity is more important than following rules, Eli said matter-of-factly. She says the world needs people who think differently. Your mama is a very smart woman. Eli nodded seriously. She's the smartest person I know. She works at the hospital, you know. She knows all about blood and medicines and how to make sick people feel better. He paused, his small face growing thoughtful. Are you smart too? The question caught Wesley off guard. How do you explain your achievements to a 9-year-old without sounding like you're bragging? I know some things about medicine too. I help make machines that doctors use to help people's hearts work better. Cool. Eli's eyes widened with genuine interest. So you're like an inventor? Like Tony Stark but for real? Wesley found himself smiling, really smiling, for the first time in longer than he could remember. Something like that, yeah. That's awesome. I want to be an inventor too when I grow up. I want to make things that help sick kids get better faster. Eli's expression grew more serious. Mama tries to hide it, but I know she's really scared about me being sick. I want to invent something so no other mamas have to be scared like that. The words hit Wesley like a sledgehammer to the chest. Here was his son, facing a life-threatening illness, and his biggest concern was sparing other families from the same fear. The selflessness, the maturity, the sheer goodness of this child was staggering. That's a very noble goal, Wesley managed, his voice thick with emotion. The world needs more people like you, Eli. Do you think I'm going to get better? The question was asked with the directness that only children possessed, cutting straight to the heart of everyone's deepest fear. Wesley looked into those gray-blue eyes, so like his own, so full of trust and hope and the terrible vulnerability of childhood. And felt something fierce and protective rise in his chest. I think you're going to get better because you're brave and strong, and because you have people who love you fighting for you. And I think the doctors here are very good at helping kids like you. Are you fighting for me too? The simple question nearly destroyed Wesley. Yes, he said, his voice steady despite the earthquake happening in his chest. I'm fighting for you too. Eli nodded as if this settled something important in his mind. Good. Mama says everything's easier when you have people on your team. Before Wesley could respond, footsteps in the hallway announced Rosemary's return. She appeared in the doorway carrying 2 cups of coffee and a paper bag that smelled like pastries, but she stopped short when she saw Wesley sitting beside Eli's bed. I hope it's okay, Wesley said quickly. Nurse Ann said he was asking for me, and you needed a break. It's more than okay, Rosemary said softly, but Wesley could see something complicated flickering across her face. Eli, how are you feeling, sweetheart? Better, Eli said brightly. Wesley was telling me about the machines he makes for people's hearts. He's like a real-life superhero inventor. Rosemary's eyes met Wesley's over Eli's head, and he saw a complex mix of emotions there, gratitude, wariness, and something else that looked like hope mixed with terror. That's wonderful, baby, she said, settling into the other chair. Did you take your medicine like Nurse Ann asked? Yes, Mama. The red pills and the white ones and the gross liquid one that tastes like chalk. Eli made a face that was so expressive Wesley had to bite back a laugh. I brought you a muffin, Rosemary said, pulling a blueberry muffin from the paper bag. Your favorite. As Eli happily attacked his breakfast, Rosemary turned to Wesley. Any word on the test results? Dar. Elena said the preliminary results look good, but we won't know for certain until this afternoon. Wesley kept his voice carefully neutral, not wanting to raise Eli's hopes until they had definitive answers. This afternoon, Rosemary repeated, and Wesley could see her calculating time in her head, measuring it against Eli's decline, against the narrow window they had to save their son. Mama, can Wesley stay for lunch? Eli asked around a mouthful of muffin. The food here is pretty terrible, but it's better when you have someone to talk to. Rosemary looked at Wesley with an expression he couldn't quite read. I'm sure Wesley has important things to do today. He can't just sit around a hospital room indefinitely. Actually, Wesley said, surprising himself with the certainty in his voice, there's nowhere else I'd rather be. Something shifted in Rosemary's expression. Surprise, maybe, or the first tentative stirring of the trust that had once existed between them. Before anyone could respond, Dr. Elena appeared in the doorway with a tablet in her hands and an expression that made Wesley's heart rate spike. Mr. Raymond, Ms. West? Could I speak with you both for a moment? The tone of her voice, carefully neutral, professionally composed, sent ice through Wesley's veins. This was either very good news or very bad news, and there was no way to tell which until she spoke. Eli, sweetheart, why don't you work on your coloring while we talk to Dr. Elena? Rosemary said, her voice steady despite the fear Wesley could see in her eyes. They followed Dr. Elena into the hallway, Wesley's heart hammering against his ribs with each step. Rosemary walked beside him, close enough that he could smell her familiar scent. Vanilla and something floral that had haunted his dreams for 10 years. The test results are back, Dr. Elena said without preamble. Mr. Raymond, you're a perfect match. The words hit Wesley like lightning, relief so powerful it nearly knocked him off his feet. Perfect match. He could save his son. He could give Eli the gift of life, of a future, of growing up to become the inventor he dreamed of being. That's wonderful, Rosemary breathed, and Wesley saw tears of relief streaming down her face. There's more, Dr. Elena continued. Eli's condition has stabilized overnight, which gives us a better surgical window. If you're willing to proceed, we can schedule the transplant for tomorrow morning. Tomorrow? Wesley's mind raced. Tomorrow felt both too soon and not soon enough. I know it seems fast, but in transplant medicine, timing is critical. Eli's current stability won't last indefinitely, and delaying surgery increases risks exponentially. Dr. Elena's voice was gentle but firm. That said, this is major surgery for both of you. There are risks, bleeding, infection, complications from anesthesia. The recovery time is significant, especially for you as the donor. I don't care about the risks, Wesley said immediately. Whatever it takes. I know you don't, but the hospital ethics board requires that you understand the full implications before consenting. You'll need to meet with a counselor, sign extensive consent forms, and undergo a final medical clearance. Dr. Elena paused. There's also the matter of insurance and financial arrangements. Money isn't an issue, Wesley said firmly. Whatever this costs, whatever Eli needs, now or in the future, it's covered. Dr. Elena nodded as if she'd expected this response. Very well. We'll begin the pre-surgical preparations this afternoon. Barring any complications, surgery is scheduled for 8 a.m. tomorrow. After Dr. Elena left to coordinate the preparations, Wesley and Rosemary stood in the hallway in stunned silence. 24 hours. In 24 hours, Wesley would be in an operating room, giving part of himself to save the son he'd only just discovered. Wesley, Rosemary said quietly, and when he turned to look at her, he saw something in her expression that took his breath away. It wasn't just gratitude, it was recognition, as if she was seeing him clearly for the first time in 10 years. I need you to understand what this means, she continued, her voice barely above a whisper. Not just the surgery, but everything that comes after. If you do this, if you save his life, you'll be part of it forever. Part of his story, part of his life. You can't just walk away when it gets complicated or inconvenient. I don't want to walk away, Wesley said, meaning it more than he'd ever meant anything in his life. Rosemary, I know I have no right to ask this, I know I've already missed so much, but I want to be his father. Really be his father. Not just biologically, but in every way that matters. Rosemary studied his face with an intensity that felt like she was looking straight into his soul. "It's not going to be easy," she said finally. "Being a parent isn't like running a company. You can't solve problems with money or authority. Sometimes you feel helpless, sometimes you make mistakes, sometimes you have to put someone else's needs before your own every single day." "I know," Wesley said, though he was beginning to realize how much he didn't know. "I want to learn. I want to be the father Eli deserves." "And what about us?" The question was so quiet he almost didn't hear it. "What about you and me, Wesley? Because we can't just pretend the past 10 years didn't happen. We can't just pick up where we left off." Wesley looked at her, really looked at her, seeing not just the woman he'd loved desperately at 24, but the woman she'd become. Stronger, more independent, shaped by years of single motherhood and sacrifice. Beautiful not just physically, but spiritually, in a way that came from facing life's hardest challenges and emerging intact. "I don't want to pick up where we left off," he said quietly. "I want to start over. As the people we are now. As Eli's parents first, and then, whatever else we might become." Something flickered in Rosemary's eyes, hope, maybe, or the possibility of forgiveness. "That's going to be complicated too." "The best things usually are." Before Rosemary could respond, a commotion from Eli's room drew their attention. They rushed back to find Eli sitting up in bed, pointing excitedly at the television mounted on the wall. "Look," he said, his face bright with excitement. "There's a story about a boy who got a new kidney from his daddy, and now he's all better and they're a family again." Wesley and Rosemary exchanged glances over Eli's head. The irony wasn't lost on either of them. Their son was watching a story that mirrored his own situation, complete with the happy ending they all desperately hoped for. "That's a nice story," Rosemary said carefully. "Do you think that could happen to us?" Eli asked, looking between Wesley and Rosemary with the hopeful innocence of childhood. "Do you think Wesley could give me one of his kidneys so I could get all better?" Wesley felt his throat tighten with emotion. Here was his chance to tell Eli the truth, to explain that he wasn't just a family friend but his father, that the surgery scheduled for tomorrow was already arranged. But when he met Rosemary's eyes, he saw a plea there: "Wait, not yet, let him be hopeful without the weight of knowing how much is at stake." "I think," Wesley said carefully, "that sometimes when people love each other very much, they're willing to do anything to help. And I think you're going to get better, Eli. I think you're going to get better and grow up to be that inventor you want to be." "Really? Really?" Eli settled back into his pillows with a satisfied smile, his attention returning to the television where the happy family was celebrating their successful surgery and new beginning. Wesley caught Rosemary's grateful look and felt something settle in his chest, not just love for his son, but a partnership with the woman who'd raised him. They were in this together now, for better or worse, building something new from the ashes of what they'd lost 10 years ago. Tomorrow would bring surgery and risk and the hope of healing. But today was for sitting with his son, learning who Eli was, and beginning to understand what it meant to be not just Wesley Raymond the CEO, but Wesley the father. The man Eli needed him to be. The man he was finally ready to become. Chapter 3. The afternoon sun cast long shadows through the hospital windows as Wesley completed the final round of pre-surgical evaluations. The psychological assessment had been particularly thorough, a soft-spoken counselor with kind eyes who'd asked probing questions about his motivations, his understanding of the risks, his long-term commitment to his son's well-being. "Living kidney donation is one of the most selfless acts a person can perform," she'd said near the end of their session. "But it's also life-changing. Your body will be forever altered, your relationship with risk will shift, and your connection to the recipient becomes permanent in ways that go far beyond the physical." Wesley had listened to every word, signed every form, absorbed every warning about complications and recovery times and the small but real possibility that something could go wrong. None of it mattered. The only statistic that held any meaning was this: With his kidney, Eli had a 97% chance of living a normal, healthy life. Without it, those chances dropped to zero. Now, at 6 in the evening, Wesley sat in the family waiting area trying to process the surreal reality that in 14 hours, he would be in an operating room giving part of himself to save the son he discovered less than 24 hours ago. His phone buzzed insistently. Jimmy again, probably fielding increasingly frantic calls from board members and business partners who couldn't understand why Wesley Raymond had simply vanished in the middle of crucial negotiations. Wesley glanced at the screen, then turned the phone face down. Let them panic. Let them scramble to handle crises that seemed impossibly trivial compared to what he was facing. Mr. Raymond? Wesley looked up to find Ruth Raymond standing in the waiting area entrance, looking like she'd stepped out of a board meeting, perfectly tailored suit, not a silver hair out of place, her usual aura of controlled authority firmly in place. But there was something different in her eyes, a crack in the composure that Wesley had rarely seen. Mother. Wesley stood slowly, bracing himself for whatever confrontation was about to unfold. How did you know I was here? Jimmy called me when you stopped answering your phone. He was worried. Ruth's gaze swept the waiting area, taking in the uncomfortable plastic chairs, the vending machines, the obvious stress of the other families maintaining vigil. He said you'd mentioned a family emergency, but that made no sense because you don't have any family except you, Wesley finished. I know. That's what everyone keeps telling me. Something in his tone made Ruth pause, her attorney's instincts recognizing a shift in the emotional landscape. Wesley, what's going on? Jimmy said you were at the hospital, but you're clearly not injured. Are you ill? Before Wesley could answer, Rosemary appeared at the far end of the waiting area, returning from the cafeteria with dinner for Eli. She stopped short when she saw Ruth, her face going pale, her entire body tensing as if preparing for an attack. The recognition was instant and mutual. Ruth's face cycled through surprise, disbelief, and something that looked almost like fear before settling into cold disapproval. Miss West, Ruth said, her voice dropping 20 degrees. I should have known. Mrs. Raymond, Rosemary replied with careful politeness, though Wesley could see her hands trembling slightly as she gripped the paper bag containing Eli's dinner. Wesley felt something dangerous rising in his chest as he watched the two most important women in his life face off like adversaries. The protective instinct that had been growing stronger by the hour flared into something fierce and uncompromising. Mother, Wesley said, his voice carrying a warning that Ruth was wise enough to heed. We need to talk. Privately. He guided Ruth to a quiet corner of the waiting area, far enough from other families to avoid being overheard, close enough to keep Rosemary in sight. Ruth followed with the controlled grace she brought to everything, but Wesley could see questions and accusations building behind her eyes like storm clouds. What is she doing here? Ruth asked without preamble. Wesley, please tell me you're not getting involved with that woman again. You remember what happened last time. Last time, you interfered, Wesley cut her off, his voice deadly quiet. Last time, you made decisions about my life without my knowledge or consent. This time is different. Ruth's eyes flashed with the kind of anger that had intimidated corporate rivals and cowed social climbers for decades. I protected you. That woman was completely unsuitable, and you were too blinded by infatuation to see it clearly. Unsuitable. Wesley repeated the word like it tasted bitter. Unsuitable for what, exactly? For loving me? For making me happier than I'd ever been? For accepting me as I was instead of who you wanted me to become? For the life you were meant to live? For the responsibilities that come with the Raymond name? Ruth's voice rose slightly before she caught herself, glancing around to ensure they weren't drawing attention. Wesley, you had everything ahead of you, the company, your reputation, a future worthy of your talents. She would have destroyed all of that. The way she destroyed the last 10 years of my life? Wesley's voice was razor-sharp now. The way she destroyed my chance at happiness? The way she destroyed my opportunity to be a father to my son? The words hit Ruth like a physical blow. Her face went white, her composure cracking completely. What did you say? You heard me. Wesley felt a cold satisfaction at seeing his mother speechless for once in her life. I have a son, Mother. A 9-year-old boy who's upstairs right now, fighting for his life because his kidneys are failing. The son Rosemary was carrying when you drove her away 10 years ago. Ruth sank into the nearest chair as if her legs had given out. That's impossible. If she had been pregnant, if there had been a child, she would have what? Contacted me? The way she tried to do before you intercepted her calls? The way she attempted to reach me before you made it clear that Wesley Raymond's illegitimate child would never be welcome in your perfect world? The accusations hung in the air between them like smoke from a fire that had been smoldering for a decade. Ruth stared at Wesley with an expression he'd never seen before, not anger or disapproval, but something that looked almost like terror. Wesley, I didn't know she was pregnant. If I had known there was a child. You would have done exactly what you did, Wesley said with brutal honesty. You would have made the problem disappear, just like you made her disappear. Just like you've made every inconvenient truth in my life disappear. Ruth was quiet for a long moment, staring at her hands as if seeing them for the first time. When she spoke again, her voice was smaller, more uncertain than Wesley had ever heard it. Is the child all right? The question surprised Wesley with its genuine concern. No. He's not all right. His kidneys are failing, and without a transplant, he's going to die. That's why I'm here, Mother. Tomorrow morning, I'm giving him one of my kidneys. Ruth looked up sharply. You're what? Wesley, you can't possibly. I can, and I will. Wesley's voice brooked no argument. He's my son. My responsibility. My chance to finally do something that matters more than quarterly profits and board meetings. But the risks, the complications, what about the company? The company will survive without me for a few weeks. It might even thrive. Wesley leaned forward, making sure his mother understood every word. This is happening, Mother. With or without your approval. The only question is whether you're going to be part of your grandson's life or not. Ruth's face went through a complex series of emotions, shock, fear, calculation, and finally something that might have been regret. I want to meet him. The simple statement caught Wesley off guard. You want to what? I want to meet my grandson. Ruth's voice was steadier now, though still carrying an unfamiliar vulnerability. If he's really your son, then he's family. And family. She paused, searching for words that didn't come easily. Family matters more than anything else. Wesley studied his mother's face, looking for signs of manipulation or ulterior motives. But what he saw instead was something he'd rarely witnessed, genuine uncertainty, a crack in the armor of absolute certainty that Ruth Raymond wore like a second skin. He doesn't know, Wesley said finally. About me being his father. Rosemary wanted to wait, to see how the surgery goes before we complicate things with explanations he might not understand. I see. Ruth absorbed this information with the careful attention she brought to complex legal negotiations. Then how do you suggest we handle this? Before Wesley could answer, Rosemary appeared beside them, her expression carefully neutral but her body language radiating tension. I'm sorry to interrupt, she said politely, but Eli is asking for Wesley. He wants to show him something before visiting hours end. Wesley started to stand, but Ruth's voice stopped him. Ms. West? Would it be possible for me to meet him as well? Rosemary's eyes widened in surprise, then narrowed with suspicion. Why? Because he's my grandson, Ruth said simply. And because I've made mistakes that I'd like the chance to rectify. Rosemary looked between Wesley and Ruth, clearly trying to read the emotional undercurrents of whatever conversation she'd interrupted. "Mrs. Raymond, with all due respect, Eli is very sick, and he doesn't need the stress of complicated family dynamics right now." "I understand," Ruth said, and there was something in her voice that made both Wesley and Rosemary look at her more closely. "I'm not asking for explanations or acknowledgments. I'm asking for the chance to meet a brave little boy who's facing something no child should have to face alone." The sincerity in Ruth's voice surprised Wesley almost as much as it seemed to surprise Rosemary. After a moment's hesitation, Rosemary nodded slowly. "5 minutes," she said firmly. "And if he seems upset or uncomfortable in any way, you leave immediately." "Agreed." The three of them made their way through the hospital corridors in tense silence, past the familiar landscape of the pediatric ICU to room 314. Eli was sitting up in bed, working on what appeared to be a complex Lego construction, his tongue poking out in concentration. "Wesley." Eli's face lit up when he saw them. "Look what I made." "It's a machine that helps people's hearts work better, like the ones you design." Wesley felt his throat tighten with emotion as he examined Eli's creation, a surprisingly sophisticated assemblage of colorful blocks that did indeed resemble cardiac monitoring equipment. "This is incredible, kiddo," Wesley said, sitting on the edge of the bed. "You really understand how these systems work." "Mama showed me pictures on her computer," Eli said proudly. "She said understanding how something works makes it less scary." "Your mama is very wise." Wesley glanced back at Ruth, who was standing in the doorway looking like she'd seen a ghost. "Eli, I'd like you to meet someone. This is Mrs. Raymond. She's a friend of mine." Eli looked up at Ruth with curious gray-blue eyes that were so like Wesley's that Ruth actually gasped softly. "Hello, Mrs. Raymond. Are you a doctor too?" "No, sweetheart," Ruth said, her voice gentler than Wesley had heard it in years. "I'm not a doctor. I wanted to meet you because Wesley has told me what a special boy you are." "I'm not that special," Eli said with matter-of-fact honesty. "I'm just sick right now. But I'm going to get better because Wesley is going to help me." "Is he?" Ruth asked, moving closer to the bed as if drawn by some invisible force. "Uh-huh. He's going to give me one of his kidneys so mine can work right again. It's like getting a really important spare part." Eli's explanation was so simple, so trusting, that it made Wesley's chest ache. Ruth looked at the child, her grandson, with an expression Wesley had never seen before. It was wonder mixed with something that looked like love at first sight, the instant connection that sometimes happened between generations when they recognized something of themselves in each other. "That's very generous of Wesley," Ruth said softly. "It's not generous," Eli said seriously. "It's what people do when they love each other. They help, even when it's hard." The simple wisdom of the statement hit all three adults like a physical blow. Out of the mouths of babes, Wesley thought, watching his mother's face transform as she looked at Eli. "You're absolutely right," Ruth said, her voice thick with an emotion Wesley couldn't identify. "That's exactly what people do when they love each other." Before anyone could respond, Dr. Elena appeared in the doorway with her usual purposeful efficiency. "Mr. Raymond? We need to begin your pre-surgical preparation. Ms. West, we should discuss the timeline for tomorrow as well." The medical intrusion broke the spell of the moment, but Wesley noticed that Ruth seemed reluctant to leave, her gaze lingering on Eli with something that looked like hunger. Not for power or control, but for connection, for the chance to be part of something meaningful. "I should go," Ruth said finally. "But Eli? I hope you'll let me visit you again after your surgery. I'd very much like to hear more about your inventions." "Okay," Eli said with easy acceptance. "Maybe you can help me build something new. It's more fun when you have helpers." As they left Eli's room, Wesley caught his mother wiping tears from her eyes with movements so subtle he almost missed them. Ruth Raymond, crying over a grandson she'd just met, a child whose existence she'd been unaware of an hour ago. "He's remarkable," Ruth said quietly as they reached the elevator. "Absolutely remarkable." "Yes, he is. Wesley." Ruth paused, seeming to struggle with words that didn't come naturally to someone accustomed to having all the answers. "I need you to know that if I had understood, if I had known about him, I would have handled things differently 10 years ago." It wasn't quite an apology, but from Ruth Raymond, it was as close as Wesley was likely to get. "I know, Mother." "No, you don't know. You can't know, because I've never told you." Ruth's voice grew stronger, more determined. "Your father and I tried for years to have children before you came along. Years of disappointment, of procedures, of hope followed by heartbreak. When you were finally born, you became everything to me. Not just my son, but my future, my legacy, my chance at immortality." Wesley stared at his mother, seeing vulnerability where he'd always seen only strength. "I was so afraid of losing you," Ruth continued, "that I nearly lost you anyway. I was so focused on protecting the future I'd planned for you that I almost destroyed the happiness you'd found for yourself." The elevator arrived, but neither of them moved to get on. "What are you saying, Mother?" "I'm saying that tomorrow, when you give your son the gift of life, you'll understand what it means to love someone more than yourself. And I'm saying that I hope you'll do a better job of it than I did." The words hung between them as the elevator doors closed and another car arrived. This time, they both stepped inside, riding down in silence that felt different somehow, not comfortable, exactly, but no longer hostile. "I'll be here tomorrow," Ruth said as they reached the lobby. "For the surgery. If you'll let me." Wesley looked at his mother, really looked at her, and saw not the formidable matriarch who'd shaped his life, but a woman who'd made mistakes and was trying to find a way to make amends. "I'd like that," he said simply. After Ruth left, Wesley made his way back to the pediatric ICU, his mind reeling from the unexpected conversation with his mother. He found Rosemary in the family lounge, staring out the window at the city lights beginning to twinkle in the gathering dusk. "How did it go with your mother?" she asked without turning around. "Better than I expected. Worse than I hoped." Wesley settled into the chair beside her, close enough to smell her familiar scent. "She wants to be part of Eli's life. And how do you feel about that?" Wesley considered the question seriously. Cautiously optimistic. "She's not the same woman who drove you away 10 years ago. Or maybe she is, but seeing Eli changed something in her. Children have a way of doing that," Rosemary said softly. "Making us better than we thought we could be." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching the city settle into evening beyond the windows. Finally, Rosemary spoke again. "Wesley, about tomorrow." "I'm going to be fine," he said quickly. "The doctors explained all the risks, and they're minimal. This is routine surgery for them. That's not what I'm worried about." Rosemary turned to face him, and Wesley saw fear in her eyes that had nothing to do with medical procedures. "I'm worried about what happens after. When Eli is better, when the crisis is over, when real life starts again." "What do you mean?" "I mean that right now, everything feels intense and immediate because we're all running on adrenaline and fear and hope. But when that's over, when we have to figure out how to actually be a family, it's going to be complicated in ways we can't imagine." Wesley reached out and took her hand, feeling the tremor in her fingers. "Are you having second thoughts? About the surgery?" "Never." "About us?" She paused, searching his face. "I don't know what us even means anymore, Wesley. 10 years ago, we were kids playing at being adults. Now we're adults trying to figure out how to be parents together to a child who's only known one of us his entire life. We'll figure it out," Wesley said with more confidence than he felt. "One day at a time." "Will we? Because your world and mine are still very different. You're still Wesley Raymond, CEO, and heir to pharmaceutical fortunes. I'm still Rosemary West, lab tech working on her nursing degree. Those things haven't changed. Maybe they should change, Wesley said quietly. Maybe I should change. Before Rosemary could ask what he meant, Nurse Ann appeared in the doorway. Mr. Raymond? Ms. West? Eli is asking for both of you. He says he has something important to tell you before tomorrow. They found Eli sitting up in bed, looking more alert and energetic than he had since Wesley arrived. There was something in his expression, a seriousness that seemed beyond his 9 years. Mama, Wesley, I need to tell you something, Eli said, patting the bed for them to sit closer. I know about the surgery tomorrow. Wesley and Rosemary exchanged glances. What do you know, sweetheart? Rosemary asked gently. I know Wesley is going to give me one of his kidneys so I can get better. And I know that's a really big thing to do for someone. Eli looked directly at Wesley, his gray-blue eyes serious and wise. I want you to know that I understand what you're doing for me, and I'm going to try really hard to deserve it. Wesley felt his throat close with emotion. Eli, you don't have to deserve it. You don't have to earn it or pay it back or prove you're worthy of it. I'm doing this because I care about you, not because you owe me anything. But that's what I don't understand, Eli said with the directness that only children possessed. You barely know me. Why would you do something so important for someone you just met? The question hung in the air like a challenge, and Wesley realized this was his moment, his chance to tell Eli the truth, to bridge the gap between stranger and father with honesty instead of careful half-truths. He looked at Rosemary, seeing his own uncertainty reflected in her eyes. But underneath the fear, he saw something else, trust. She was leaving the decision to him, trusting him to know what their son needed to hear. Eli, Wesley said, his voice gentle but sure, sometimes we meet people who become important to us very quickly. Sometimes we recognize something special in someone right away, something that makes us want to protect them and help them and be part of their life. Like love at first sight? Eli asked with innocent curiosity. Something like that, Wesley agreed, his heart racing as he chose his words carefully. When I met you, when I saw how brave you were and how smart you were and how much you cared about other people, I knew you were someone I wanted to keep in my life forever. Eli considered this seriously. So we're going to be friends? Even after I get better? We're going to be much more than friends, Wesley said, glancing at Rosemary one more time before taking the leap. Eli, I'm not just someone who wants to help you get better. I'm your father. The words fell into silence so complete that Wesley could hear his own heartbeat. Eli stared at him with wide eyes, processing this information with the careful attention children brought to life-changing revelations. You're my dad? Eli asked finally, his voice small with wonder. Yes, Wesley said, his throat tight with emotion. I'm your dad. And I know that's confusing and probably scary, because you've lived your whole life without knowing me. But I want you to know that I love you, and I've always loved you, even when I didn't know you existed. Eli was quiet for a long moment, his gaze moving between Wesley and Rosemary as he tried to make sense of this new reality. Is that why you're giving me your kidney? He asked. Because you're my dad? I'm giving you my kidney because you need it, Wesley said honestly. But yes, also because I'm your dad, and that's what dads do. They take care of their children, no matter what. Even when they're scared? Eli asked with the vulnerability that only children could express so openly. Especially when they're scared, Wesley said, reaching out to take Eli's small hand in his own. Being brave doesn't mean you're not scared. It means you do the right thing even when you're scared. Eli nodded slowly, absorbing this wisdom. Then, to Wesley's amazement, a smile spread across his face. Not the polite smile of a sick child trying to please adults, but a genuine expression of joy. So after tomorrow, when I'm all better, I'll have a dad, Eli said with satisfaction. That's pretty cool. Yes, Wesley said, his voice thick with tears he couldn't stop. You'll have a dad. And you'll have a son, Eli added, as if this were equally important. And I'll have a son, Wesley agreed. As Eli settled back into his pillows, clearly exhausted by the emotional weight of the conversation, Wesley felt something fundamental shift inside his chest. This wasn't just about saving a child anymore, it was about claiming his place in a family, about becoming the man his son needed him to be. Tomorrow would bring surgery and risk and the hope of healing. But tonight was for sitting with his son, holding his hand, and understanding for the first time what it meant to love someone more than your own life. The man he'd been yesterday, focused on profit margins and board meetings and the hollow achievements of corporate success, felt like a stranger. The man he was becoming, Eli's father, Rosemary's partner, someone who put family before everything else, felt like coming home to himself. And as he watched Eli drift off to sleep, Wesley Raymond finally understood what his mother had been trying to tell him: when you love someone more than yourself, you discover who you were always meant to be. Chapter 4. The pre-dawn hours at Presbyterian Hospital carried a different kind of silence, not the bustling quiet of day shift preparations, but the profound hush that settled over a place where miracles and heartbreak happened in equal measure. At 4:30 in the morning, Wesley found himself wide awake in his pre-surgical room, staring at ceiling tiles that had probably witnessed thousands of similar vigils. Sleep had been impossible. Every time he'd closed his eyes, his mind had raced through scenarios both hopeful and terrifying. In 6 hours, he would be unconscious on an operating table while surgeons removed one of his kidneys. In 7 hours, that same kidney would hopefully be saving his son's life. The mathematics of hope had never felt so personal, so desperately important. A soft knock interrupted his restless thoughts. Wesley expected to see a nurse with final pre-surgical instructions, but instead, Rosemary peered around the door, her hair caught in a messy bun and exhaustion written in every line of her face. "I couldn't sleep either," she said quietly, stepping into the room and closing the door behind her. "Mind if I sit with you for a while?" "Please," Wesley said, grateful for the company and the distraction from his own spiraling thoughts. Rosemary settled into the uncomfortable hospital chair, pulling her cardigan tighter around herself. She wore jeans and a soft sweater that made her look younger, more like the woman he'd fallen in love with a decade ago. But there were differences too, a strength in her posture that spoke of years spent handling crises alone, a wariness around her eyes that came from learning not to trust in happy endings. "How's Eli?" Wesley asked. Nervous but excited. "He keeps asking when you'll be all matched up so you can both get better together." Rosemary's smile was soft with motherly affection. "He's been planning what he wants to do when he's strong enough to leave the hospital. Apparently, he wants to go to the zoo and the science museum and something called Dad's Work so he can see where you make the heart machines." Wesley felt warmth bloom in his chest at the casual way Eli had apparently integrated the concept of having a father into his future plans. "I'd love to show him the lab. He'd probably understand the engineering better than half my employees." "He's brilliant," Rosemary said with fierce pride. "Always has been. Even when he was tiny, he'd take apart every toy he could get his hands on, trying to figure out how things worked. I used to find screws and batteries hidden under his mattress like other kids hide candy." "Tell me more," Wesley said, settling back into his bed. "Tell me everything I missed." For the next hour, as dawn crept slowly across the city beyond the windows, Rosemary painted a picture of Eli's childhood in vivid, loving detail. His first steps, taken while chasing a ball that had rolled under the couch. His first word, which had been, "Why," repeated with relentless curiosity about everything around him. The way he'd cried inconsolably during thunderstorms until Rosemary started telling him stories about the clouds having conversations. He was 3 when he built his first actual invention, Rosemary said, her eyes bright with memory. A contraption made of cardboard boxes and toilet paper tubes that was supposed to transport cookies from the kitchen to his bedroom. It didn't work, but he was so proud of the engineering. I wish I could have seen that, Wesley said, and the regret in his voice was sharp enough to cut. I know you do. Rosemary's voice was gentle, understanding. Wesley, I need you to know that I never told him his father didn't want him. I told him that sometimes adults make mistakes, and that his daddy lived far away, but that didn't mean he didn't love him. Even though you thought I'd abandoned you both. Even though I thought you'd abandoned us both, Rosemary confirmed. Because whatever I believed about you, I wasn't going to let Eli grow up thinking he wasn't worthy of love. The simple generosity of that decision, protecting Wesley's relationship with their son even when she believed he'd betrayed them, hit him like a physical blow. How many women would have done the same? How many would have chosen their child's emotional well-being over their own hurt and anger? I don't deserve you, Wesley said quietly. Either of you. Deserve has nothing to do with it, Rosemary replied, her voice firm. We don't love people because they deserve it, Wesley. We love them because we can't help ourselves. The words hung between them, loaded with meaning that went far beyond their current situation. Wesley found himself studying Rosemary's face in the soft light filtering through the windows, seeing not just the woman she'd become but echoes of the girl who'd stolen his heart at 21. Do you? He asked quietly. Still love me, I mean. After everything that's happened, everything I failed to do you still love me? Rosemary was quiet for so long that Wesley wondered if he'd overstepped, pushed too hard for answers she wasn't ready to give. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. I never stopped loving you, Wesley. That was the problem. She looked down at her hands, avoiding his gaze. For 10 years, I tried to convince myself that what we had was just young love, that I'd idealized you in my memory. But seeing you with Eli, watching you choose him without hesitation, it's like you became the man I always believed you could be. I want to be that man, Wesley said, reaching out to cover her hand with his. Not just for Eli, but for you. For us. There might not be an U.S., Rosemary said, though she didn't pull her hand away. Wesley, what you're doing today, it's going to change everything. Not just medically, but emotionally. Eli is going to see you as his hero, the man who saved his life. That's a heavy burden to carry. I can carry it. Can you? When the gratitude wears off and he's just a regular kid who doesn't always listen and sometimes talks back and occasionally makes mistakes? When being a parent means saying no to things he wants and setting boundaries he'll test. When it's not dramatic and life-saving anymore, just daily and ordinary and sometimes really hard? Wesley considered her questions seriously. She was right, everything about this situation was heightened by crisis and adrenaline. When Eli was healthy, when they settled into normal life, would Wesley still feel this fierce protectiveness? Would he still prioritize his family over everything else? I know you think I'm going to get bored or overwhelmed and walk away, Wesley said finally. And I understand why you'd think that. But Rosemary, yesterday I was a man who had everything and felt empty. Today I'm a man who has a family, and I've never felt more complete in my life. It's not about getting bored, Rosemary said, her voice growing more urgent. It's about the reality of what you're committing to. Wesley, you've never been responsible for anyone but yourself. You've never had to put someone else's needs first every single day. You've never had to make sacrifices that don't come with recognition or reward. You're right, Wesley admitted. I haven't. But I want to learn. I want you to teach me. Something shifted in Rosemary's expression, surprise, maybe, or the first tentative stirring of hope. What are you saying? I'm saying that I don't want to be the weekend father who shows up for the fun parts and leaves when things get difficult. I don't want to be the guy who sends child support checks and birthday presents and thinks that's enough. Wesley turned to face her fully, ignoring the pull of his foreline. I want to be there for homework and soccer games and teenage heartbreak. I want to be the person Eli calls when he needs help, when he's scared, when he has good news to share. And what about your company? Your life in Manhattan? Your mother's expectations? Wesley was quiet for a moment, thinking about the empire he'd built, the reputation he'd cultivated, the life that had felt so important just 48 hours ago. I've been thinking about that, he said finally. About what really matters. About what I want to build versus what I want to inherit. And I think it's time for some changes. Before Rosemary could ask what he meant, another soft knock interrupted them. Dar. Elena appeared in the doorway, dressed in surgical scrubs and carrying a tablet. Good morning, she said with professional warmth. Mr. Raymond, how are you feeling? Ready, Wesley said, surprised by how true that was. Nervous, but ready. That's completely normal. I wanted to go over the timeline one more time, and to let you know that Eli is doing beautifully this morning. His vitals are stable, and he's been asking for you every few minutes. Dar. Elena explained the surgical procedure in detail. Wesley would go first, the transplant surgery taking approximately 3 hours. Once his kidney was successfully removed, they would begin Eli's surgery immediately in the adjacent operating room. If everything went according to plan, both surgeries should be completed by early afternoon. The recovery timeline varies for each patient, Dr. Elena continued, but typically, donor recovery is 4 to 6 weeks for full normal activity. Eli's recovery will be longer, several months of careful monitoring, medications to prevent rejection, gradual return to normal childhood activities. But he'll be okay? Rosemary asked, the question carrying the weight of a mother's desperate hope. All indicators suggest an excellent prognosis, Dr. Elena said with careful optimism. Children are remarkably resilient, and having a living donor significantly improves outcomes. After Dr. Elena left to finalize surgical preparations, Wesley and Rosemary sat in comfortable silence, the weight of the approaching surgery settling between them like a physical presence. Wesley, Rosemary said finally, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest. Anything. If something goes wrong today, if there are complications, if something happens to you during surgery, I need to know that you're not doing this out of guilt or obligation. I need to know that you're doing it because you genuinely want to be Eli's father. The question hit Wesley with unexpected force. Was he acting out of guilt? Out of some misguided attempt to make up for 10 years of absence? Or was his motivation deeper, more genuine? I'm doing it because when I look at Eli, I see the best parts of both of us, Wesley said slowly, working through his own feelings as he spoke. I see your kindness and intelligence, and maybe some of my curiosity and determination. I'm doing it because he's already changed me in ways I didn't know were possible. Wesley paused, searching for words that could capture the transformation he'd experienced in less than 2 days. But mostly, I'm doing it because when he called me Dad for the first time, I finally understood what I'd been missing my whole life. Not just a child, but the chance to be someone's hero. The chance to be the person someone runs to when they're scared, the person someone trusts to make everything okay. Rosemary's eyes filled with tears, but she was smiling. That's exactly what I hoped you'd say. Does that mean you're willing to take a chance on us? All 3 of us, as a family? I think, Rosemary said carefully, that I'm willing to see what happens. Day by day, step by step. No promises about forever, but open to the possibility. It wasn't a declaration of love, but it was hope. And right now, hope felt like everything. A new knock interrupted them, this time it was Jimmy, looking harried and apologetic as he peered around the door. Boss, I'm so sorry to bother you, but the Morrison deal is falling apart, and the board is. Jimmy stopped mid-sentence as he took in Wesley's hospital gown and 4-line. Jesus, Wesley, what's going on? Are you sick? Come in, Jimmy. Close the door. Wesley waited until his assistant had complied before continuing. I'm not sick. I'm having surgery to donate a kidney to my son. Jimmy's face went through a complex series of expressions: confusion, disbelief, and finally something that looked like panic. "You're what now?" "Boss, you don't have a son. You don't have any kids." "I do now," Wesley said simply. "Jimmy, meet Rosemary West." "Rosemary, this is Jimmy, my long-suffering assistant who keeps my professional life from imploding." Rosemary nodded politely, but Jimmy looked like he'd been hit by a truck. "Mr. Raymond," Jimmy said carefully, "with all due respect, are you having some kind of breakdown? Because kidney donation is major surgery, and you have responsibilities, and the company will survive without me for a few weeks," Wesley interrupted. "In fact, it might do better. Jimmy, I need you to schedule a board meeting for next month. I'm going to be proposing some significant changes to the company structure." "What kind of changes?" Wesley looked at Rosemary, seeing understanding dawn in her eyes as she realized what he was planning. "The kind that prioritize making a difference over making money," Wesley said. "The kind that turn a profitable medical technology company into a force for actual good in the world." Jimmy looked like he might hyperventilate. "Wesley, you can't just restructure a billion-dollar company because you're feeling emotional about surgery." "I'm not feeling emotional," Wesley said, though even as he said it, he knew it wasn't entirely true. "I'm feeling clear. For the first time in my adult life, I'm absolutely clear about what matters and what doesn't." Before Jimmy could argue further, the surgical team arrived to begin Wesley's preoperative preparations. As they wheeled him toward the operating room, Wesley caught sight of Eli being prepared in the adjacent room. Their eyes met through the open doorway, and Eli raised his small hand in a wave that was both brave and scared. "See you on the other side, Dad," Eli called out, his voice carrying across the hallway. "See you on the other side, son," Wesley replied, meaning it more than he'd ever meant anything in his life. As they entered the operating room, that sterile cathedral of hope and precision, Wesley's last conscious thought was of gray-blue eyes that looked exactly like his own, and a voice calling him Dad as if it were the most natural thing in the world. The anesthesia pulled him under like a gentle tide, carrying him toward whatever future awaited them all on the other side of this leap of faith. When Wesley woke up, the first sensation was pain. A deep, throbbing ache in his left side that felt like someone had reached inside his body and rearranged the furniture. The second sensation was relief so profound it made him dizzy. He was alive. The surgery was over. And if he was waking up, that meant... "Eli?" The word came out as a croak, his throat raw from the breathing tube. "He's perfect." Rosemary's voice, warm and thick with tears of joy. "Wesley, the surgery was a complete success. Your kidney started working immediately. Dar. Elena says it's one of the best transplant outcomes she's ever seen." Wesley tried to turn his head and found Rosemary sitting beside his bed, looking exhausted but radiant. Behind her, he could see into the adjacent recovery room where Eli lay sleeping, surrounded by monitors that beeped with steady, healthy rhythms. "He's really okay?" Wesley asked, needing to hear it again. "He's really okay. Color is good, vitals are strong, kidney function is already improving." Rosemary reached out and took his hand, her fingers warm and steady. "Wesley, you saved him. You saved our son." The words hit him like a physical force, bringing tears he couldn't control. He'd done it. He'd given Eli the gift of life, of a future, of growing up to become the inventor he dreamed of being. But more than that, he'd given himself the gift of becoming a father. The gift of belonging to something bigger and more important than corporate success or financial achievement. "How long was I out?" Wesley asked. 4 hours. It's just after 2 in the afternoon." Rosemary squeezed his hand gently. "Your mother has been here the whole time, along with Jimmy. They're both desperate to see you, but I told them family comes first." Family. The word sent warmth through Wesley's chest that had nothing to do with pain medication. "Can I see him?" Wesley asked. "Can I see Eli?" The nurses said as soon as you're fully awake, they'll roll your bed over so you can be in the same room during recovery. Eli specifically requested it. He wants to make sure his dad is okay. His dad. Wesley closed his eyes, letting the reality of it wash over him. He was a father now, not just biologically but in every way that mattered. He had a son who worried about his well-being, who wanted to share his recovery room, who planned to show him inventions and visit his workplace. He had a family. "Rosemary," Wesley said, opening his eyes to meet her gaze. "I meant what I said before surgery. About wanting to change things, to be the father Eli deserves. But I also meant what I said about us. Wesley, you just had major surgery. Maybe we should talk about this when you're feeling better." "I'm feeling better right now than I've felt in 10 years, Wesley interrupted. "Because I finally know who I'm supposed to be. I'm supposed to be Eli's father and your partner and the man who puts his family first, no matter what." Rosemary studied his face with an intensity that felt like she was looking straight into his soul. "What about your company? Your life in Manhattan? All the things that were important to you before? They're still important, but in a different way. I want to use the company to make a real difference, to help families like ours who are facing medical crises. And as for Manhattan..." Wesley paused, realizing he'd already made a decision he hadn't fully acknowledged. "I want to live wherever you and Eli are. I want to be there for school pickup and homework help and bedtime stories. Even if that means giving up the penthouse and the corner office and the life you've built. Especially if it means that," Wesley said with absolute certainty. "Rosemary, 2 days ago I had everything the world said I should want, and I was empty. Today I have a family, and I feel complete." Before Rosemary could respond, voices in the hallway announced that Eli was awake and asking for both his parents. The word "parents," plural, together, a unit, sent another wave of warmth through Wesley's chest. As the nursing staff wheeled Wesley's bed into Eli's recovery room, he caught sight of his son looking pale but alert, his eyes bright with the particular brand of excitement that only children could maintain in the face of major medical procedures. "Dad." Eli's face lit up when he saw Wesley. "You're awake. How do you feel? Does it hurt? Are you going to be okay?" The rapid-fire questions, delivered with such genuine concern for his welfare, nearly undid Wesley completely. Here was this brave little boy, recovering from his own surgery, worried about his father's comfort. "I feel great, kiddo," Wesley said, his voice rough with emotion. "A little sore, but great. How about you?" "I feel different," Eli said thoughtfully. "Like something inside me is working better now. Dr. Elena says that's your kidney doing its job." "Our kidney," Wesley corrected gently. "It belongs to both of us now." Eli's smile was brighter than sunshine. "Our kidney. I like that." As they settled into their shared recovery room, Wesley felt a profound sense of peace settle over him. This was what he'd been searching for his entire adult life without realizing it. Not success or recognition or financial achievement, but this simple, profound joy of being needed and loved for exactly who he was. The phone call that had shattered his world at 2:47 a.m. had actually put it back together in ways he'd never imagined possible. He was Wesley Raymond, not just CEO or heir to pharmaceutical fortunes, but father and partner and the man who'd risk everything for the people he loved. And as afternoon sunlight streamed through their hospital room windows, illuminating the faces of his son and the woman he'd never stopped loving, Wesley finally understood what his father had tried to teach him all those years ago. That true wealth couldn't be measured in dollars or achievements, but in the depth of love you were willing to give and the courage you showed in protecting the people who mattered most. He'd found his wealth. He'd found his purpose. He'd found his way home. Chapter 5. 5 days after the surgery, Wesley discovered that recovery from major surgery was nothing like the controlled, efficient process he'd imagined. The pain medication made him groggy but restless, the limited mobility frustrated his need to be useful, and the hospital bed felt like a cage after decades of constant motion and corporate urgency. But none of that mattered when he looked across their shared room and saw Eli growing stronger by the hour. The transformation in his son was nothing short of miraculous. Color had returned to Eli's cheeks, the constant exhaustion had lifted from his eyes, and his natural curiosity was reasserting itself with the kind of relentless energy that made the nursing staff both smile and quietly panic. Yesterday, he'd convinced Nurse N to let him examine the kidney function monitoring equipment with a magnifying glass he'd somehow acquired from the children's activity room. "It's like having a tiny computer inside me," Eli had explained to Wesley with scientific fascination. "Your kidney is sending messages to my brain, telling it that everything's working right now." "Our kidney," Wesley had corrected automatically, the possessive pronoun feeling more natural each time he said it. This morning brought the news they'd all been hoping for: Dr. Elena was releasing them both to continue recovery at home. For Eli, that meant Rosemary's modest two-bedroom apartment in Philadelphia. For Wesley, it meant, well, they hadn't quite figured that part out yet. "Mr. Raymond?" A voice from the doorway interrupted his thoughts. Wesley looked up to see a woman he didn't recognize, mid-30s, sharp suit, predatory smile that immediately put him on alert. "I'm sorry, visiting hours don't start until," Nurse N began, but the woman cut her off with practiced efficiency. "Angela Morrison, Herald Tribune. I just need 5 minutes of Mr. Raymond's time for a follow-up story about his dramatic gesture of fatherhood." Wesley felt ice form in his veins. The Herald Tribune was a tabloid that specialized in turning private family moments into public entertainment, usually with the kind of sensationalized spin that destroyed reputations and relationships. "Get out," Wesley said quietly, his voice carrying the authority that had closed impossible business deals. "Now. Mr. Raymond, surely you want to share your side of this heartwarming story?" The billionaire CEO who discovered he had a secret son and risked everything to save him? Angela Morrison's smile sharpened. "It's quite romantic, really. Though some of our sources suggest a different narrative." "What sources?" Wesley asked despite himself. "Well, for instance, we've spoken with former employees of yours who remember you visiting Mercy General's maternity ward 10 years ago. We have financial records showing large cash withdrawals around the time Ms. West disappeared from the city. We have a very detailed account from someone who claims to have been paid to ensure Ms. West couldn't find work in Manhattan." The words hit Wesley like physical blows. Someone had orchestrated a campaign to drive Rosemary away, using his name and possibly his money. The pattern was too systematic, too thorough to be coincidental. "I don't know what you're talking about," Wesley said, but even as he spoke, pieces of a puzzle he hadn't known existed began falling into place. "Don't you? Because our source suggests this touching reunion is actually a carefully orchestrated publicity stunt to rehabilitate your image after years of cold, calculated cruelty toward the mother of your child." "That's completely false." "Is it? Tell me, Mr. Raymond, when you found out Ms. West was pregnant 10 years ago, what exactly did you do about it?" Wesley stared at the reporter, his mind reeling. "I never knew she was pregnant. I never knew about any of this until 5 days ago." Angela Morrison's laugh was sharp as broken glass. "That's a beautiful story. Unfortunately, it contradicts pretty much every piece of evidence we've uncovered. But don't worry, we'll be sure to include your denials in the article." She turned to leave, then paused in the doorway. "Oh, and Mr. Raymond? You might want to check your mother's financial records from 10 years ago. I think you'll find them very illuminating." After she left, Wesley sat in his hospital bed feeling like the world had tilted sideways. His mother's financial records. Large cash withdrawals. A systematic campaign to destroy Rosemary's life in Manhattan. The implications were staggering and horrible and beginning to make a sickening kind of sense. "Wesley?" Rosemary appeared in the doorway, her face pale. Who was that woman? Nurse and said she was asking questions about our family. A reporter from the Herald Tribune. Wesley's voice sounded hollow even to himself. Rosemary, we need to talk. Privately. They arranged for Ruth to sit with Eli while Wesley and Rosemary found a quiet corner of the family lounge. The conversation that followed was one of the most difficult of Wesley's life. 10 years ago, Wesley began carefully, when you disappeared from the city. You said it became impossible for you to find work, that landlords wouldn't rent to you, that doors kept closing. Yes, Rosemary said slowly, obviously wondering where this was leading. And you thought it was because I was behind it. Because I wanted you out of my life. Wesley, we've been through this. I know now that you didn't, but someone did. Wesley felt sick as he said the words. Someone used my name, possibly my money, to systematically destroy your ability to build a life in Manhattan. Someone wanted you gone badly enough to orchestrate an entire campaign against you. Rosemary went very still. What are you saying? I'm saying that reporter just told me about financial records and former employees who remember visits I never made and payments I never authorized. Wesley's voice was tight with controlled fury. I'm saying someone did exactly what you thought I'd done, but they did it without my knowledge. Who would do something like that? Wesley closed his eyes, not wanting to say the words but knowing he had to. Someone who thought they were protecting me from an unsuitable relationship. Someone who had access to my accounts and my schedule and enough influence to make your life impossible. Understanding dawned in Rosemary's eyes, followed immediately by a pain so raw it made Wesley's chest ache. Your mother. I think so. Yes. Rosemary was quiet for a long moment, processing this revelation. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. Wesley, if that's true, if your mother orchestrated all of this, then everything I believed about you for 10 years was a lie. Not everything, Wesley said quickly. I was still young and selfish and probably not ready to be a father. I still let you walk away without fighting hard enough to find you. But you didn't abandon us. You didn't decide we weren't worth your time or attention. Rosemary's eyes filled with tears. God, Wesley, for 10 years I told myself you were a coward who chose comfort over love. For 10 years I built walls around my heart because I thought the man I loved had betrayed me in the cruelest possible way. And for 10 years, I told myself you'd left because I wasn't enough, Wesley said. Because love wasn't enough to bridge the gap between our worlds. They sat in silence, both grappling with the magnitude of how one person's interference had shaped a decade of their lives. How different things might have been if Ruth Raymond had chosen trust over control, if she'd given her son the chance to make his own decisions about love and family. What do we do now? Rosemary asked finally. Now we focus on Eli and getting him completely healthy, Wesley said firmly. And then we decide what we want our future to look like, based on who we are today, not who we were 10 years ago or what we thought we knew about each other. And your mother? Wesley's jaw tightened. My mother and I are going to have a very serious conversation about boundaries and consequences. We all face moments when our past collides with our present. How do you handle old wounds when someone you love is counting on you? Tell us your thoughts below. As if summoned by their conversation, Ruth Raymond appeared in the family lounge, her expression carefully controlled but her eyes betraying anxiety. Wesley, dear, Eli is asking for both of you. He wants to show you something he's been working on. Ruth's gaze moved between Wesley and Rosemary, clearly sensing the tension. Is everything all right? Actually, Mother, I'd like to speak with you first. Alone. Something flickered across Ruth's face, fear, perhaps, or the recognition that her carefully constructed world was about to come under scrutiny. Of course, she said smoothly. Rosemary, would you mind checking on Eli? He's quite excited about his project. After Rosemary left, Wesley studied his mother's face, seeing her with new eyes. Had she always been this controlled, this careful about managing situations to her advantage? Or had he simply been too naive to recognize the manipulation? "Mother," Wesley said quietly, "I need you to tell me about the financial arrangements you made 10 years ago regarding Rosemary West." Ruth went very still, her composed mask slipping for just a moment. "I don't know what you mean." "I think you do. I think you know exactly what I mean." Wesley's voice was steady, but underneath was steel. "A reporter just left here with very specific information about payments made from accounts connected to me, about systematic interference in Rosemary's ability to find work or housing in Manhattan. Wesley, you have to understand, no, you have to understand." Wesley cut her off, his patience finally exhausted. "Did you or did you not use my name and money to drive the mother of my child out of the city?" Ruth was quiet for a long moment, her hands folded in her lap with the kind of precision that came from a lifetime of maintaining control in difficult situations. "I protected you," she said finally. "That woman would have ruined your future, trapped you in a relationship that was completely inappropriate for someone of your background and prospects. She was pregnant with your grandson." "I didn't know that at the time," Ruth said quickly. "If I had known about the child." "You would have done exactly what you did," Wesley said with cold certainty. "You would have seen it as an even bigger threat to your plans for my life." Ruth flinched as if he'd struck her. "That's not true. I would never have harmed a child. But you had no problem harming the child's mother. You had no problem destroying her life to serve your own agenda." "I thought I was saving you from making a terrible mistake," Ruth said, her voice growing desperate. "Wesley, you were so young, so infatuated. You couldn't see how different your worlds were, how impossible a future with her would be. The only thing that made it impossible was your interference." Wesley stood up carefully, his surgical incision reminding him that he was still recovering, still vulnerable. But his voice was stronger than it had ever been. "Mother, for 34 years, I've lived my life trying to earn your approval, trying to be the son you wanted me to be. I built a company, accumulated wealth, maintained a reputation, all to meet standards you set without ever asking what I actually wanted. Everything I did was for your own good, everything you did was for your own good," Wesley corrected. "You couldn't bear the thought that your son might choose love over legacy, might prioritize happiness over the family image you'd spent decades cultivating." Ruth's composure finally cracked completely. "I lost your father when you were 18. You were all I had left, the only family that mattered. I couldn't risk losing you too. So you made sure I lost everyone else first." The words hung between them like a death sentence. Ruth looked at her son, really looked at him, and seemed to see for the first time the man he'd become despite her efforts to control his path. "Wesley, I don't want to hear apologies or justifications," Wesley said firmly. "I want to know if you understand that your actions cost me 10 years with my son. 10 years of his childhood that I can never get back. 10 years of believing that the woman I loved had chosen to leave me rather than fight for our relationship." Ruth's eyes filled with tears, the first genuine emotion Wesley had seen from her in years. "I understand. And I'm sorry. I'm sorrier than you'll ever know. Sorry isn't enough anymore, Mother. Not for this. Then what can I do? How can I make this right?" Wesley looked at his mother. This woman who'd shaped his life through fear and control, and realized that for the first time in their relationship, she was asking what he wanted instead of telling him what he should want. "You can start by respecting my choices," Wesley said. "You can accept that Rosemary and Eli are my family now, and that their happiness is more important to me than your opinion of them. You can learn to be a grandmother instead of a manipulator. And if I can't? If I can't change who I am after 62 years of being this way?" Wesley felt something sad but final settle in his chest. "Then you'll have to live with the consequences of losing your son and grandson because you couldn't love them more than you loved control." Ruth stared at him for a long moment, seeming to weigh his words against a lifetime of established patterns. Finally, she nodded slowly. "I'll try," she said quietly. "I don't know if I can change completely, but I'll try. For Eli. For you. For the chance to be part of your family instead of trying to control it." It wasn't everything Wesley wanted to hear, but it was a beginning. And sometimes, beginnings were enough. They made their way back to Eli's room, where they found Rosemary helping their son with what appeared to be an incredibly complex construction project involving tongue depressors, rubber bands, and medical tape. "Dad! Grandma Ruth!" Eli looked up with excitement that was infectious. "Look what I built. It's a model of how kidney transplants work." Wesley examined Eli's creation with genuine amazement. Despite being constructed from hospital supplies, it was a remarkably accurate representation of the surgical procedure they'd just undergone. "This is incredible, buddy," Wesley said. "How did you figure out how to show the blood vessel connections?" "Mama helped me look up pictures on her phone, and Grandma Ruth explained some of the medical stuff." Eli beamed with pride. "I want to show it to Dr. Elena before we go home." "Speaking of going home," Rosemary said carefully, "we need to talk about logistics. Eli and I live in Philadelphia, which is about 2 hours from Manhattan. If you want to be part of his daily life, I'm moving to Philadelphia," Wesley said without hesitation. "I've already talked to Jimmy about setting up a satellite office there. Most of my work can be done remotely, and what can't be done remotely probably isn't as important as I thought it was." Eli's face lit up like sunrise. "Really? You're going to live near us? If that's okay with you and your mom, yes. I want to be close enough to help with homework and attend soccer games and be there when you need me." "What about your penthouse?" Rosemary asked. "Your life in Manhattan?" "My life is wherever you and Eli are," Wesley said simply. "Everything else is just geography." Ruth cleared her throat softly. "If I may. Wesley, what about the company? You can't run Raymond Medical Technologies from Philadelphia indefinitely." Wesley looked at his mother, then at Rosemary and Eli, and felt the last pieces of his transformation click into place. "Actually, I've been thinking about that," he said. "What if instead of running a company that makes money from medicine, we ran a foundation that uses medicine to help people? What if we converted Raymond Medical Technologies into a nonprofit that provides medical technology to underserved communities?" The room fell silent as everyone processed this suggestion. It wasn't just a career change Wesley was proposing, it was a complete transformation of the family legacy. "Wesley," Ruth said slowly, "that would mean giving up billions of dollars in potential profits." "Money I never really needed in the first place," Wesley replied. "Mother, what's the point of having resources if you don't use them to make the world better?" Eli looked between the adults with the serious expression he wore when processing complex ideas. "Dad, does that mean you'd be like a superhero, but instead of flying around fighting bad guys, you'd help sick kids get better?" "Something like that, yeah." "That's awesome." Eli's enthusiasm was contagious. "Can I help when I'm older? I want to invent new machines that make surgeries easier." Wesley felt his heart swell with pride and love and absolute certainty about the path forward. "I'd love your help, kiddo. We'll be partners." "Wesley," Rosemary said softly, "are you sure about this? You're talking about completely restructuring your life, your company, everything you've built." "I'm sure," Wesley said, reaching out to take her hand. "Rosemary, 5 days ago I was a successful businessman with an empty apartment and an emptier life. Today I'm a father and hopefully soon to be a partner to the woman I've loved for 10 years. I'm part of a family that actually matters." He squeezed her hand gently, feeling the warmth and strength that had attracted him to her in the first place. "Besides," he added with a smile, "what's the point of having a second chance if you don't use it to become the person you were always meant to be?" As afternoon sunlight streamed through their hospital room windows, illuminating the faces of his son, the woman he loved, and even his complicated but trying to change mother, Wesley Raymond finally understood what wealth actually meant. It wasn't about money or power or corporate achievement. It was about having people who needed you, people who loved you not for what you could give them but for who you were when everything else was stripped away. The midnight phone call that had shattered his old life had given him something infinitely more valuable in return, a family worth fighting for, a purpose worth living for, and the courage to become the man his son deserved as a father. Tomorrow they would leave the hospital and begin the complicated, beautiful work of building a life together. There would be challenges and adjustments and probably more interference from reporters and business associates who couldn't understand why Wesley Raymond had chosen love over profit. But none of that mattered now. What mattered was the way Eli looked at him with complete trust, the way Rosemary's hand felt in his own, the way his mother was genuinely trying to earn forgiveness instead of demanding it. What mattered was that he was exactly where he belonged, with exactly the people who mattered most, ready to write the next chapter of a story that had started with desperation and was ending with hope. The man who'd answered that midnight phone call had been successful but empty. The man who would walk out of this hospital tomorrow was wealthy beyond measure, rich in all the ways that actually counted. And it had all started with 3 impossible words: he needs you. Now and always, Wesley would be exactly what his family needed him to be. Chapter 6. 3 months after the surgery, Wesley stood in the morning sunlight of his new kitchen in Philadelphia, watching Eli attempt to make pancakes while simultaneously explaining the scientific principles of batter chemistry. The sight of his son, healthy, energetic, completely absorbed in turning breakfast into a physics experiment, still filled Wesley with wonder that bordered on the miraculous. "Dad, did you know that the bubbles in pancake batter are actually carbon dioxide gas created by the reaction between baking powder and liquid?" Eli said, wielding a spatula with the confident air of a 9-year-old who'd been reading science textbooks for entertainment. "I did not know that," Wesley replied, though he was fairly certain Eli had explained this same principle at least 3 times in the past week. "That's fascinating." "Everything's fascinating when you understand how it works," Eli said matter-of-factly, a philosophy that Wesley had discovered applied to everything from pancake chemistry to kidney transplants to the complicated dynamics of building a family from scratch. Their new house was nothing like Wesley's Manhattan penthouse, a modest 3-bedroom colonial in a neighborhood where children rode bikes in the street and neighbors knew each other's names. It was smaller, older, and required more maintenance than Wesley had ever imagined. It was also the happiest place he'd ever lived. "Morning, boys," Rosemary said, appearing in the kitchen doorway wearing scrubs and looking like she was running slightly late for her shift at Children's Hospital of Philadelphia. She'd taken a position in pediatric nephrology 6 weeks ago, using her experience with Eli's care to help other families navigate the complex world of childhood kidney disease. "Mama, look." Eli proudly displayed a pancake that was roughly the shape of what might generously be called a kidney. "I made breakfast art." "That's beautiful, sweetheart," Rosemary said, dropping a kiss on top of Eli's head before moving to the coffee maker with the efficient motion of a working mother. "Did you take your morning medications?" "Yes, Mama." Dad made sure. Eli had settled into calling Wesley Dad with an ease that still took Wesley's breath away. No hesitation, no awkwardness. Just the simple acceptance that this was how their family worked now. Wesley handed Rosemary her travel mug, their fingers brushing in a gesture that had become as natural as breathing. 3 months of sharing daily life, morning routines, grocery shopping, homework supervision, bedtime stories, had created an intimacy that felt both new and ancient, like rediscovering something precious they'd lost and found again. "How's the Jefferson Project coming along?" Rosemary asked, referring to Wesley's latest initiative through the newly restructured Raymond Foundation. "We're breaking ground on the new pediatric wing next month," Wesley said, unable to keep the satisfaction out of his voice. "It'll be the first completely free pediatric kidney treatment center on the East Coast." The transformation of Raymond Medical Technologies into the Raymond Foundation had been complex, involving months of legal restructuring, board negotiations, and the kind of bureaucratic challenges that made Wesley grateful for his years of corporate experience. But watching the first foundation-funded mobile medical unit serve rural communities had been worth every headache. "That's wonderful," Rosemary said, and the pride in her voice made Wesley feel like he'd conquered mountains. The Patterson family called yesterday. Little Sarah's transplant was completely successful, and they wanted to thank the foundation for covering all the expenses. These were the moments that made Wesley understand why his father had gone into medicine in the first place, not for profit or recognition, but for the simple, profound satisfaction of knowing that your work had saved a child's life. "Dad," Eli said, interrupting Wesley's thoughts, "can we visit the new medical center when it's finished? I want to see how they built the kidney machines." "Of course we can. Maybe you can help me design some improvements." Wesley had discovered that Eli's mechanical intuition was genuinely remarkable. The boy could identify engineering inefficiencies that had escaped Wesley's team of graduate-educated designers. "Really? You'd let me help with real inventions?" "Real inventions for real patients," Wesley confirmed. "Partners, remember?" Eli's grin could have powered the entire house. After Rosemary left for work, Wesley and Eli settled into their morning routine, checking homework, reviewing Eli's medication schedule, and planning their afternoon activities. Today was Saturday, which meant a trip to the Science Museum followed by dinner with Grandma Ruth, who had been making a genuine effort to learn how to be a grandmother instead of a manipulator. The transformation in his mother had been one of the most surprising developments of the past 3 months. Ruth still had moments of reverting to her old controlling patterns, but she'd thrown herself into grandmotherhood with the same focused intensity she'd once brought to managing Wesley's life. Last week, she'd spent an entire afternoon helping Eli build a working model of a dialysis machine out of aquarium pumps and surgical tubing. "Dad, can I ask you something?" Eli said as they cleaned up the breakfast dishes. "You can ask me anything, anytime. Are you happy?" The question was delivered with typical 9-year-old directness, cutting straight to the heart of things that adults usually spent years avoiding. Wesley paused in loading the dishwasher, considering how to answer honestly. Was he happy? 3 months ago, he'd had everything the world said should make him happy: wealth, success, recognition, power. He'd also been profoundly lonely, living a life that felt successful but empty. Now he had a mortgage, a minivan, and a calendar filled with soccer practices and parent-teacher conferences. He woke up at 6:30 to help make school lunches and went to bed exhausted from the daily logistics of family life. His bank account was smaller, his schedule was fuller, and his Manhattan penthouse had been replaced by a house that needed a new roof. "I'm happier than I've ever been in my life," Wesley said, meaning it completely. "Good," Eli said with satisfaction. "Because Mama is happy too. I can tell because she sings in the shower now, and she didn't used to do that." The simple observation hit Wesley with unexpected force. Rosemary singing in the shower, such a small thing, but evidence of contentment that went deeper than surface adjustments to their new life together. "How do you know she didn't used to sing in the shower?" Wesley asked. "Because for 9 years it was just me and her, and I know all her sounds," Eli said with matter-of-fact wisdom. "When she was worried about money or my kidney getting worse, she was quiet in the shower. When she's happy, she sings." Wesley felt his throat tighten with emotion at this glimpse into the years he'd missed, Eli learning to read his mother's moods through the sounds she made, understanding at age 9 that silence meant worry and singing meant peace. "I love that she's happy," Wesley said quietly. "Me too. And Dad? I'm really glad you're my dad." The simple statement hit Wesley like sunlight breaking through clouds. "I'm really glad I'm your dad too, kiddo." That afternoon at the Science Museum, Wesley watched Eli explain the principles of mechanical advantage to a group of younger children who'd gathered around the pulley exhibit. His son had a gift for making complex concepts accessible, a natural teaching ability that reminded Wesley of his own father's patience with curious medical students. "He's going to be a remarkable man," a voice said beside him. Wesley turned to find an elderly museum volunteer watching Eli with admiration. "He already is," Wesley replied. "You must be very proud. Every single day." Driving home from the museum, Eli chattering excitedly about the new cardiovascular exhibit, Wesley found himself thinking about the path that had brought them to this moment. The midnight phone call that had shattered his old life now felt like the best thing that had ever happened to him. Not because of the crisis, he wouldn't wish that terror on any parent, but because of what had emerged from it. He'd learned that love wasn't something you fell into and then maintained through careful management, like a business relationship. Love was something you chose every day, in small acts and large gestures, in the decision to put someone else's well-being before your own comfort. "Dad, are you and Mama going to get married?" Eli asked from the back seat, the question delivered with his usual directness. Wesley nearly swerved the car. "What makes you ask that?" "Because Tommy at school says when grown-ups live together and love each other, they usually get married. And you and Mama love each other, right?" "We do love each other," Wesley confirmed, his heart rate still elevated from the unexpected question. "So are you going to get married?" Wesley considered how to answer honestly without making promises he hadn't yet discussed with Rosemary. "Would you like us to get married?" "Yeah," Eli said without hesitation. "Then we'd be a real family." "Eli, we're already a real family. Marriage doesn't make a family real, love does." "I know that," Eli said with exaggerated patience. "But if you got married, then Mama would be happy singing in the shower forever, and you'd never have to worry about us leaving." The insight was so perceptive it took Wesley's breath away. Here was his 9-year-old son understanding adult relationship dynamics with crystalline clarity. "Would you worry about us leaving?" Wesley asked gently. "Sometimes," Eli admitted. "Not because I think you want to leave, but because grown-ups sometimes have to leave even when they don't want to. Like when you didn't know about me for 9 years, you didn't want to be away from me, but you had to be because you didn't know I existed." Wesley pulled into their driveway and turned off the engine, needing to have this conversation while looking at his son's face. "Eli, I need you to understand something very important," Wesley said, turning in his seat to meet Eli's eyes. "I will never leave you again. Not because of misunderstandings, not because of other people's interference, not for any reason. You are my son, and I will always be your father, no matter what happens between me and your mama. Promise?" "I promise. Cross my heart and hope to die." Eli giggled at the solemn childhood oath. "That's what kids say, Dad." "Then it must be true." They found Rosemary in the living room when they entered the house, sitting on the couch with a laptop and a stack of medical journals, working on a research project about pediatric kidney transplant outcomes. She looked up when they came in, her face lighting up with the kind of smile that made Wesley understand why people wrote poetry about love. "How was the museum?" she asked. "Awesome." Eli launched into a detailed description of everything he'd seen and learned, complete with demonstrations using couch cushions as fulcrums and throw pillows as weights. Wesley settled beside Rosemary on the couch, close enough to smell her familiar scent, to feel the warmth of her body beside his. 3 months of living together had created thousands of these small intimacies. Shared glances over Eli's head, hands that found each other automatically during movies, the comfortable silence of two people who'd learned to exist in the same space without constant negotiation. "Wesley," Rosemary said after Eli had gone upstairs to work on a science project, "I've been thinking about something." "What's that?" "About us. About what we're building here." She gestured around the living room, which showed evidence of all 3 of their lives. Wesley's medical journal stacked beside Eli's Lego creations, Rosemary's nursing textbooks sharing space with Wesley's foundation paperwork. "What about it?" "I think we should make it official." Wesley's heart stopped. Official how? Rosemary smiled, reaching into the pocket of her cardigan and pulling out a small velvet box that made Wesley's world tilt sideways. Wesley Raymond, she said, opening the box to reveal a simple gold band, will you marry me? The question hung in the air like music, like magic, like everything Wesley had hoped for but hadn't dared to expect. His throat closed with emotion so powerful he couldn't speak. I know it's not traditional for the woman to propose, Rosemary continued, her voice soft but sure, but nothing about our relationship has been traditional. We started with crisis, we've built our life on second chances, and I've learned that waiting for the perfect moment means missing the moments that are already perfect. Wesley stared at the ring, at this woman who continued to surprise him with her courage and grace, at the life they'd built together from the wreckage of misunderstanding and lost time. Rosemary, he managed finally, are you sure? Because I come with complications. A meddling mother, a company that's in transition, a tendency to throw myself completely into whatever I'm passionate about. I know exactly who you are, Rosemary said with certainty. You're the man who gave our son a kidney without hesitation. You're the man who restructured his entire life to be present for homework and soccer games. You're the man who turned a billion-dollar company into a force for good because you decided making money was less important than making a difference. She leaned closer, her eyes holding his with an intensity that made the rest of the world disappear. You're the man I fell in love with at 21, and the man I'm choosing to love at 31, and the man I want to love for the rest of my life. So yes, Wesley Raymond, I'm sure. In that case, Wesley said, his voice thick with tears he couldn't control, yes. Yes, I'll marry you. Yes, I want to build a life with you and Eli. Yes to everything. When she slipped the ring onto his finger, it felt like coming home and starting over at the same time. When he kissed her, it tasted like promises and possibility and the kind of love that grows stronger through testing. Finally, they broke apart to find Eli standing at the bottom of the stairs, pumping his fist in triumph. Eli. Rosemary laughed. How long have you been listening? Long enough, Eli said with satisfaction. I told you guys you should get married. Now we can plan a wedding. Can I be the best man? Can we have it at the Science Museum? Can we invite Dr. Elena and Nurse Ann? Wesley found himself laughing, deep, joyful laughter that seemed to bubble up from some place in his soul that had been dormant for years. You can be whatever you want to be at our wedding, Wesley said, pulling Eli into a three-way hug with Rosemary. It's your family too. Have you ever gotten a second chance at love when you least expected it? What would you risk for the people who matter most? Share your thoughts below. 6 months later, Wesley stood in the garden behind Children's Hospital of Philadelphia, wearing a simple black suit and watching Eli adjust his boutonniere for the 5th time in 10 minutes. Their wedding venue was unconventional, the healing garden where families of pediatric patients found peace during difficult times, but it felt perfect for a family whose love story had begun in a crisis and bloomed into hope. Dad, do I look okay? Eli asked, smoothing down his tie. You look perfect, buddy. Are you nervous? Wesley considered the question seriously. A little. Good nervous, though. The kind of nervous you get when something wonderful is about to happen. Like Christmas morning nervous? Exactly like Christmas morning nervous. Pastor David, who had officiated at dozens of hospital bedside ceremonies for families facing uncertain futures, stood at the simple altar they'd constructed among the flowering trees. Dr. Elena and Nurse Ann sat in the front row, representing the medical team that had brought their family together. Jimmy was there with his wife and children, still occasionally shaking his head in amazement at his boss's transformation from workaholic CEO to devoted family man. And Ruth sat in the second row, wearing a lavender dress that Eli had picked out because purple is Mama's favorite color, and I want Grandma Ruth to make Mama happy on her wedding day. The gesture had made Ruth cry, the good kind of tears that came from being included in love rather than excluded by it. The string quartet began playing, and Wesley's breath caught as Rosemary appeared at the end of the garden path. She wore a simple ivory dress that made her look radiant, her hair crowned with flowers that Eli had helped choose. But it was her smile that made Wesley's heart race, pure joy, uncomplicated by doubt or fear, the smile of a woman who knew exactly what she wanted and was walking toward it with confidence. Eli walked beside her, officially giving his mother away while simultaneously gaining a father, beaming with pride at his dual role in the ceremony. "Dearly beloved," Pastor David began, his voice carrying the warmth that came from knowing this family's story, "we are gathered here today to witness something remarkable, not just the marriage of Wesley and Rosemary, but the official recognition of a family that has already been tested by crisis and strengthened by love." Wesley found himself thinking about the journey that had brought them to this moment. The midnight phone call that had shattered his old life. The terror of nearly losing Eli before he'd even known his son existed. The surgery that had bound them together not just biologically but spiritually. The difficult conversations, the gradual healing, the daily choice to build something new from the pieces of what had been broken. "Wesley," Pastor David said, "do you take Rosemary to be your wife, your partner in raising Eli, your companion in building a life dedicated to love and service?" "I do," Wesley said, his voice carrying across the garden with absolute certainty. "Rosemary, do you take Wesley to be your husband, your partner in all things, your chosen family for all the days of your life?" "I do," Rosemary said, her eyes bright with tears and laughter. "And Eli," Pastor David turned to their son with a smile, "do you accept Wesley as your father, not just in biology but in all the ways that matter, in daily care, in guidance, in unconditional love?" "I do," Eli said with enthusiasm that made the entire gathering laugh. "Then by the power vested in me, and witnessed by this community of people who love you, I pronounce you a family, bound not just by law but by choice, strengthened not just by happiness but by the challenges you've overcome together." When Wesley kissed his wife, it felt like sealing a promise that had been building for months of shared life, shared hopes, shared commitment to putting each other first. When Eli threw his arms around both of them, it felt like the completion of something that had started with desperation and ended with joy. As their guests applauded and the photographer captured the moment, Wesley realized that the man who'd answered that midnight phone call, successful but empty, wealthy but lonely, felt like a stranger from another lifetime. The man he'd become, Eli's father, Rosemary's husband, someone who measured wealth in love rather than dollars. Felt like coming home to himself after years of being lost. "Mr. and Mrs. Raymond," the photographer called out, "could we get a family photo by the fountain?" Wesley looked at his wife, at his son, at the life they'd built from crisis and hope and the daily choice to love each other through whatever came next.